Warning. Before we begin, this episode contains discussion of civil unrest, political intimidation, and confrontations involving religious spaces. Listener discretion is advised. The views expressed by the hosts and panelists are their own and are intended for commentary and analysis.
There used to be lines you didn't cross in this country. Courts, homes, and churches. But tonight, we're talking about what happens when political activism stops being protest and starts looking a lot more like intimidation, especially when the targets are people trying to worship, grieve, or simply exist outside the approved narrative. In Minneapolis, tensions around immigration enforcement spilled into a place that used to be off-limits, a church. Video shows a political media figure and an organized crowd forcing their way inside during a service, not to pray, not to listen, but to confront, disrupt, and apply pressure. And here's the question nobody in legacy media wants to ask. If the politics were reversed, if the crowd was conservative, if the target was a mosque or a synagogue, would this be called activism? Or would it be called exactly what it looks like? Tonight, we're breaking down the incident involving Don Lemonhead, the response from media allies, and why the same people screaming about threats to democracy suddenly go silent when intimidation comes from their side. Because the issue isn't immigration. The issue is who gets to break the rules and who gets protected when they do. All right, let's bring in the crew. Brian's here bringing the MAGA fire, calling out hypocrisy, double standards, and the rules that only seem to apply when the wrong people break them. Rachel's our independent voice cutting through the spin and asking whether the same behavior would be tolerated if the politics were reversed. Daniel's connecting the dots, media protection, intimidation tactics, and how pressure campaigns get rebranded as virtue when they point in the approved direction. And Skylar's here from the left, challenging intent versus impact and arguing why activists see disruption as justified. If this happened in a church you care about, would you still defend it? Let's get into it. Let's lay out what we actually know. Not the spin, not the hashtags, not the edited clips with dramatic music underneath. Video circulating online shows Don Lemon entering a Minneapolis church alongside a visibly agitated group during an active service. The atmosphere isn't calm. This isn't dialogue. This isn't a scheduled forum. It's confrontation. Raised voices, phones out, and a clear intent to force a moment. Now pause right there. Because we've been told for years that presence itself can be violence, that showing up uninvited can be threatening, and that disruption is harm, unless apparently the cause has the correct branding. When conservative protesters stand outside government buildings, they're extremists. When parents speak loudly at school board meetings, they're domestic threats. But when a media figure storms into a church with a political crowd, suddenly it's bravery and speaking truth to power. Power, a church service. That's who we're calling power now. Tonight, we're going to talk about selective outrage, media permission structures, and why religious spaces only seem to matter when they align politically. All right, let's dig into this. So let me start here. Brian, strip the politics out of it. If a conservative media figure walked into a church, mosque, or synagogue mid-service with a fired-up crowd to make a point, what would the headline be?
Oh, Artie, we wouldn't even get to the headline. We'd get the FBI press conference first. They'd call it intimidation, stochastic terrorism, an attack on democracy, probably throw in January 6th energy, just for flavor. And CNN would have a somber piano soundtrack playing while some expert explains how presence itself is violence. But because this guy checks the right ideological boxes, suddenly it's brave, it's speaking truth, it's holding institutions accountable. Give me a break. A church service isn't a TED Talk. It's not a protest venue, and it sure as hell isn't a place for cable news cosplay activism. If you need to storm into a church to make your point, maybe your argument can't stand on its own. And look, I'm old enough to remember when the left screamed that words were violence. Now they're fine with actual disruption, as long as it's their team doing the shouting.
Exactly. It's funny how sacred spaces suddenly become optional depending on who's holding the megaphone. And you're right, Brian. The reaction tells you everything. Same behavior, totally different label. But let me push this to Rachel because Brian touched on something important: intent versus impact. Rachel, even if someone believes they're morally right, does that give them a free pass to interrupt a religious service? Or is that where activism crosses into something else?
That's the line right there, Artie. Intent doesn't erase impact. You don't get to say, I meant well, and ignore how your actions land on the people in that space. A church service is voluntary, private, and personal. People are there to worship, not to be confronted by a political mob with cameras rolling. And let's be honest, this wasn't about conversation. If it were, they would have asked for a meeting, held a forum, or stood outside afterward. Walking in during the service is a power move. It's designed to force compliance or reaction, not understanding. Also, quick reality check. If the goal is to win hearts and minds, this is a terrible strategy. You don't persuade people by ambushing them where they feel most vulnerable. You harden positions and escalate resentment. That's not justice, that's theater.
Theater, that's the word. Because nothing says moral high ground like interrupting prayer so you can trend on social media. All right, Daniel. Rachel just called this a power move, not persuasion. Zoom out for me. Is this just one incident, or does it fit a larger pattern we've been seeing?
Oh, this fits the pattern perfectly. This is narrative enforcement, not protest. We've moved from convince people to pressure institutions, and now to occupy spaces that used to be off limits. First, it was school board meetings, then private businesses, now churches. And notice something else. Cameras are always ready. That tells you the audience isn't the people in the room. It's the internet. The goal isn't resolution. It's spectacle. You create a moment, dare anyone to resist, and then frame resistance as proof of guilt. What's dangerous is how normalized this is becoming. Once you justify disruption in religious spaces for the right cause, there's no logical stopping point. Today, it's immigration. Tomorrow, it's speech. Next week, it's beliefs themselves. That's not activism. That's coercion with better branding.
Coercion with better PR. Yeah, that one's getting written down. All right, Skylar, you're our never-Trumper voice. You oppose Trump, you oppose his immigration approach, but you've also said norms matter. From your perspective, did this cross a line?
Yes, it did. You can oppose Trump's policies and still say this was the wrong tactic. Storming into a church during a service doesn't strengthen the argument against immigration enforcement. It weakens it. If the concern is morality, then the method matters. Violating someone else's sacred space to make a political point undermines the very ethical claim you're trying to advance. And strategically, it hands ammunition to the people you're trying to criticize. Opposition doesn't mean abandoning restraint. And if we start excusing behavior just because it's aimed at Trump-aligned causes, we lose any credibility when we complain about intimidation from the other side.
And that's the key takeaway. Like, this isn't about immigration policy. It's not about left versus right. It's about whether any cause justifies crossing lines we used to agree were off limits. Because once intimidation gets rebranded as courage and disruption gets labeled as virtue, we're not debating policy anymore. We're normalizing pressure, and that should make everyone uncomfortable. Okay, so we've got video of a church service disrupted. We've got old Don Lemonhead, a recognizable media figure. We've got confrontation in a space that used to be considered off limits. And yet, no media pylon, no emergency panels, no lectures about democracy hanging by a thread. So let me start here. Rachel, when the media suddenly goes quiet or careful after an incident like this, what does that usually tell you?
It tells you the story doesn't cooperate. When something challenges the narrative, coverage slows down, language softens, and suddenly everything is complex. That's not journalism. That's damage control. If this had gone the other way, the framing would already be locked. Intimidation, extremism, threat. Instead, we get silence, qualifiers, and selective context. And audiences notice that contrast immediately. Media credibility doesn't erode because people disagree. It erodes because standards aren't applied consistently.
Right. Silence isn't neutral. It's editorial judgment. All right, Brian. Rachel's saying the quiet response is the tell. Why does this story make the media so uncomfortable?
Because it exposes the rule book, Artie, and they don't want people reading it. They've spent years telling us disruption is violence, that presence equals threat, that words themselves can cause harm. Now they're stuck defending or ignoring behavior that violates their own standards. If they cover this honestly, they have to admit the rules change depending on who's doing the disrupting. And once people see that clearly, the whole moral authority act falls apart. So instead of outrage, we get avoidance. It's not complicated. It's inconvenient.
Inconvenient truth tends to get buried fast. All right, Daniel, zoom this out. What happens long-term if behavior like this keeps getting excused?
Normalization. Slowly, quietly, and then all at once. Every time intimidation is reframed as courage, the boundary moves. First public spaces, then private spaces, then sacred ones. And once people learn that tactics don't matter as long as alignment is correct, restraint disappears. That's how pressure becomes policy enforcement, not through law, but through fear of backlash. History doesn't usually break suddenly. It erodes through permission.
All right, Skylar, last word from you on this. You oppose Trump and his immigration policies, but the media response here has been quiet. From a Never-Trumper perspective, what does that silence do?
It hurts the case against Trump, flat out. When media outlets ignore or soften behavior like this, it reinforces the perception that criticism is selective, not principled. And that's a gift to Trump supporters because it validates their argument that standards only apply one way. If you actually want to persuade people who aren't already on your side, you need credibility. And credibility requires consistency. When the press won't hold its own allies accountable, it makes every future criticism of Trump sound performative instead of serious. From a strategic standpoint, this kind of silence doesn't protect democracy. It undermines trust, hardens divisions, and ultimately strengthens the very political movement it claims to oppose.
And that's really the point where this lands. This story isn't about liking or hating Trump. It's not about immigration policy, and it's about whether we still believe there are lines that don't move just because the politics are convenient. When churches become acceptable targets, when disruption gets rebranded as courage, and when the media decides silence is safer than consistency, we're not watching activism anymore. We're watching standards collapse in real time. And once those standards are gone, they don't come back easily.
Before we move on, quick merch drop for folks who want to support the show and also wear a statement. We just added the I Support ICE shirt in the merch store. A bold design for people who stand for law and order and want to wear what they believe. We've still got the classic hats, hoodies, mugs, stickers, and coffee blends too, including High Lakes, Rock Creek, and Bitterroot. Because if we're talking hard truths, we might as well be properly caffeinated while we do it. Links are in the show description. Every purchase keeps this independent and uncensored.
Here's what I want people to sit with after tonight. This wasn't a debate about immigration numbers, deportation quotas, or which administration did what first. This was about behavior and whether we still believe that how you act matters just as much as what you believe. For years now, we've been told that tone matters, that presence matters, that certain spaces deserve respect, because once those boundaries fall, everything turns into confrontation. And yet, when those same boundaries are crossed by the right people, suddenly we're asked to squint, to contextualize, to excuse. That's not nuance. That's selective enforcement of values. What makes moments like this dangerous isn't the volume of the crowd or the fame of the person involved. It's the precedent. If a church service can be interrupted because the cause is deemed urgent enough, then no space is truly neutral anymore. Once sacred spaces become political stages, disagreement stops being something we talk through and starts being something we impose. And that shift doesn't empower the public. It trains people to accept pressure instead of persuasion. History shows us over and over again that societies don't lose their footing all at once. They lose it gradually when exceptions become habits and habits become norms. And finally, this is where the media silence matters most. Not because everyone needs to agree, but because standards only mean something if they're applied consistently. When intimidation is called courage on Monday and extremism on Tuesday, trust doesn't just erode, it evaporates. People stop listening, stop believing, and stop engaging honestly. And when that happens, the loudest voices win by default. Not because they're right, but because everyone else checked out. That's not a healthy culture, and it's not a sustainable one. So whether you're conservative, independent, never Trump, or still figuring it out, this shouldn't be a team sport. The question is simple. Do the rules apply evenly, or only when it's convenient? Because the moment principles become conditional, they stop being principles at all. That's where we leave it tonight. Remember to speak truth, stir thought.
Tonight's episode of Data Dissonance is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller Series, including the Covenant Protocol and the Prophet Directive. high-stakes political thrillers built on intelligence, tradecraft, power struggles, and the kind of uncomfortable truths you won't hear in polite conversation. If you like this show, the questions we ask, the lines we challenge, and the systems we examine, you'll find the same DNA on the page. Real-world tension, relentless pacing, and stories that don't flinch when the narrative gets messy. You can find the books now on Amazon. Links are in the description. Thanks for supporting independent storytelling, independent thought, and Data and Dissonance. We'll see you next time.